Okay, so let's start on some of these examples on your sheet. Let's look at number 1. We're going to simplify. Square root of negative 18. So the first thing you want to do is break down that negative 18 into prime factors. So I'm going to take out the negative 1, first of all. And then the prime numbers for 18 are 3 times 3 times 2. So I know the square root of negative 1 is I, and I have these 3's that I can pair together. I just have a 2 that's left over that I can't pair with anything, so that's going to have to stay inside the radical. So your answer is going to be 3i radical 2. Any questions?
You have to have an I with it.
The negative 1?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to take that out as an I.
Okay.
Okay, so let's look at number 2. The square root of negative 125 x to the 5th. Okay, so if you're getting these bigger numbers and you're not sure what the prime factors should be, you can always use a factor tree and start with something you know is going to go in evenly into the number. Like I know 5 is going to go evenly because it ends in a 5. So 5 goes in 25 times, and you know that's going to be divisible by 5, and that's 5. So here on the outside you have your prime factors for 125. So I'm going to rewrite that. Negative 1 times 5 times 5 times 5. And x to the 5th, I'm going to have 5 x's and then I want to pair up the ones that I can pair up. So I have 2 5's, one set of x's here and another set of x's there. So I can take out 5i x squared, and you'll have a 5x left inside, and that's going to be your answer. Okay, so you could write it as 5x squared I square root of 5x. That's fine. The x squared and the I can be interchangeable. Any questions? Alright, let's look at number 3. We're multiplying negative 2i times 7i. So we're going to multiply the coefficients together and then multiply the i's together. Negative 14 I squared. But I can't leave the exponent on the I because it's bigger than 1, so I have to simplify it. I squared is negative 1, so I actually have negative 14 times negative 1, and that'll simplify to positive 14. And that'll be your answer. Any questions?
What did you get your answer from 2?
Well, I took the I out from this negative 1, and then I had a group of 5's here, so I took out a 5, and I had 2 groups of x. And whenever you take out more than one factor from a root, you multiply them together. So that's how I got the 5ix squared. I just multiplied them all together. Okay, so let's look at number 4. Square root of negative 10 times square root of negative 15. Okay, so we are not going to multiply the negative 10 and negative 15 together first. We have to take the i's out before we do anything like that, or you'll get the answer wrong. So I'm going to rewrite this with the i's outside the roots. And now I can write the factors for 10 and 15 underneath one radical. So it'll look like this. You have your I squared. And instead of multiplying 10 and 15, I'm going to break them down so I can see what factors I can pair up. So 10 is 2 times 5, and 15 is 5 times 3. Okay, so I do have a pair of 5's that I can take out, but the 2 and the 3 are going to have to stay inside the root. So we'll get 5i squared radical 6. Okay, so I'm really not quite finished because I can't leave the I squared. I have to change I squared to what?
Negative 1.
negative 1. So you actually have negative 1 times 5. It's negative 5, radical 6. And that would be your answer. Okay, let's look at number 5. Since we have been working with the exponents for i's, why don't you guys go ahead and do I radical 4, I to the 45th power. Simplify that down, and I'll do it up here, and let's see what everybody gets. So you're just going to work number 5. So since this is an odd exponent, I rewrote it as an even exponent times the I that was left over. And this I to the 44th, I wrote as I squared to the 22nd power. I always want the I squared in the parentheses. And then your leftover I. So I squared is negative 1. And negative 1 to an even power is positive 1. Positive 1 times I is just going to be I. Okay, I'd like to do a couple more problems. Let's look at 15. You're adding and subtracting complex numbers. So the hardest part on this one is to remember to distribute the negative all the way through that second binomial. So if you wrote this without parentheses, you'd have 8 plus 6i minus 2 minus 3i. And then we're just going to collect like terms. So I'm going to add my real numbers together, or combine them. 8 minus 2, 6. And then 6i minus 3i is going to be plus 3i. And that would be your answer. That's as much as you can do with it. Any questions? Okay, the last one, 16, we're multiplying two complex numbers together. So since they're binomials, you have to use FOIL to multiply them together. So my first terms, 3 times 4, it's going to be 12. And your outer terms, plus 18i, inner terms, minus 20i, and the last terms, minus 30i squared. And then combine your like terms. And also, I can't leave this I squared as part of my answer, right? So what is I squared going to be? Okay, so what's going to happen with that 30? That's right, you're going to have negative 30 times negative 1. It's going to make that positive right there. So it's actually 12 plus 18i minus 20i plus 30. And when you combine your like terms, you have 42 plus negative 2i. And that's all you can do with that value. So when you're multiplying complex numbers together, you always wind up with a binomial. Any questions?